Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this second gathering within the project Fragments of Repair. Welcome. My name is Hlavajova, and I'm Artistic Director of BAC, Basis voor Actuele Kunst here in Utrecht. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to BAC, albeit virtually, on this occasion of the second gathering in the context of this multi-part project convened by BAC, together with artist Kader Attia and the Colonial Forum La Colonie in Paris. Welcome to all of you, our digital fellows today, as well as the fellows who gather in person in Paris with La Colonie Nomade, a part of this project which is generously hosted by Dynamo de Banlieues Bleues, Pantin in Paris. And we will be switching with our live stream between Utrecht and Paris throughout this afternoon, as this is where one of our contributors today, Olivier Marboeuf, is currently with other contributors to La Colonie Nomade. The project Fragments of Repair is composed of three main fragments, if you will. The exhibition here at BAC, then La Colonie Nomade, as just mentioned, a collective study program conceptualized by political theorist, feminist, and decolonial activist Françoise Vergère, and a series of gatherings conceptualized by Witske Maas, which consists of bi-weekly hybrid off and online conversations, lectures, screenings, and public assembly forums around the theory and practice of repair, of which this is the second session. The project has been conceptualized by Kader Attia and Witske Maas. Witske regrets not to be able to join us directly at or from BAC, of course, due to the pandemic conditions. And they conceptualized the project in conversation with Françoise Vergère, BAC curator for public practice Rachel Rakes, and the entire BAC team. Now, the realization of this project is clearly a collective effort. Nonetheless, I'd like to mention words of appreciation for the following people who have been closely involved in organizing, managing, and facilitating today's session. Production has been adeptly taken care of by Thomas Orbon and head of public practice Hide van Groningen, with assistance by Nina Spa. The live stream is being taken care of by Ruben Hameling and Daniel Lodewegers. A special thanks also to Alex Hugonnier, program coordinator for La Colonie Nomade, as well as the whole team at La Dynamo and notably its technical crew. I want to thank all collaborators of this project, all individuals and organizations who have made this project possible by generously sharing their resources of knowledge, time, energy, as well as funds. And with the latter, a special thanks to all financial support financial support we received to make this project a reality. Now, in Fragments of Repair, artist Kader Attia proposes the notion of decolonial repair as a tactic to engage with the planetary urgencies of collective mental health in a world wounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. Injury, wound, and repair have been key concepts across Kader's artistic practice, especially in relation to the material and immaterial injustices of colonial violence that persists into the present. The current conditions bring these injustices into sharper relief, while adding additional injuries through chronic uncertainty, social isolation, exhaustion, loss, and fear. The project asks, what pathways can repair, not a return to past ways, but an itinerary shaped by demands for decolonization and the politics of restitution? Thus, what pathways can decolonial repair offer to life in and out of the viral, social, and psychological pandemonium? Today, we will address this question in two parts. First, we will collectively view the body's legacies, part two, the Postcolonial Body, the 2018 film by Kader Attia, which is also part of the exhibition here at BAC. And after that, we will switch the live stream to and from La Colonie Nomade at La Dynamo in Paris for a conversation with writer, critic, storyteller, and curator Olivier Marboeuf, and a geographer, writer, educator, and abolitionist scholar and activist Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who will be joining us via Zoom today Thank you and special welcome to both of you as well. Now, Kader's 2018 film, The Body's Legacies Part 2, The Postcolonial Body, tackles police violence and racial body politics in France today. Throughout the film, 4 decolonial thinkers, activists, and culture practitioners share thoughts around the subject of the individual and collective racialized body. The conversations pivot around the concrete, devastating instance of racially motivated police aggression where a young man of Congolese descent, Theo Luhaka, was assaulted by police officers following a race-based identity check in a Parisian banlieue in 2017. Through their personal recollections, philosophical perspectives, and sociological scrutiny, there emerges an unambiguous account of present-day police brutality and institutional racism. This powerful testimony of systemic oppression of Black lives draws a straight line from historical colonialism into the present and disproves the self-congratulatory Western narrative of progress and reason that had led to contemporary democracy with its supposed all-encompassing equity. The key questions the work addresses become ever more urgent at the current intersection of 2 global crises, the COVID-19 pandemic and the perpetuation of attacks by police against racial and ethnic minorities. As the already marginalized populations are subjected to disproportionate pandemic impact and even more control, patrolling, and state-sponsored harm, we see intensification of Black Lives Matter and similar mobilizations across the world. Shaping the public space and the space of politics by accommodating them against and in spite of their hostile racial logic, the notion of repair is guided not by the ideals of mere inclusion of the postcolonial body in Western society, but by the urgency to radically overhaul this society's racist psyche. The postcolonial body is the second part 2 of The Body's Legacies. Part 1, which we will not be screening today, is a film essay, The Body's Legacies Part 1, The Objects, which is concerned with the restitution of objects that were taken from Africa and North America by colonizing powers. Please note that the work contains graphic video surveillance footage of the assault on Theo Luhaka. And at last, please note that the screening is not being recorded, but we will record a conversation afterwards, which then will be made available on BAC website in the weeks to come with the materials from the opening from 2 weeks ago on the 17th April this year and from the forthcoming conversations. I really greatly look forward to this opportunity to collectively view this film and to the conversation afterwards. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We're now joined by our 2 speakers who will engage in a discussion on a number of concerns and urgencies that led to, and of course, issue from the film The Body's Legacies, Part 2, The Postcolonial Body that we have just viewed. Allow me to introduce Olivier and Ruthie. Olivier Marboeuf, himself a protagonist in the film we've just seen, is a writer, critic, storyteller, and curator. Olivier founded the independent art space Espace Chiasma, which ran from 2004 to 2018 in Le Lilas, in the Parisian suburbs. The program he developed addressed minority representations and post-colonial situations through exhibitions, screenings, debates, performances, and collaborative projects. Olivier is interested in different modalities of knowledge transmission and imagines permanent or ephemeral structures based on conversations and speculative narratives. His works intersect with poetic fiction and speculative theories. Drawing from the imagination and literature of the Caribbean as much as the mythologies of the suburbs, Olivier explores ways of making sensitive the history that is imprinted upon minority bodies and the narratives of wandering communities. His recent texts are published on his blog, Toujours debout, which translates as Always Upright, Currently, he produces films as part of Spectral Productions and contributes to the Cinematic Distribution and Research Unit, Pantin. Olivier lives and works between Paris and Rennes and is now in Paris at La Dynamo with his fellow La Colonie nomad peers. Welcome, Olivier.
Hello.
Ruth Wilson Gilmore is a geographer, writer, educator, and abolitionist scholar and activist. She's a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences and American Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, where she's also director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. Ruthie writes about abolition, racial capitalism, organized violence, organized abandonment, changing state structure, the aesthetics and politics of seeing, labor and social movements, and internationalism. She's the author of the prize-winning book Golden Gulags, Prisons, Surplus, Crisis, and Opposition in Globalizing California from 2008. Forthcoming books include Change Everything, Abolition Geography, Essays Towards Liberation, and Stuart Hall, Selected Writings on Race and Difference, co-edited with Paul Gilroy. And actually, I think this one is just about out and being launched next month. The Antipode documentary Racial Capitalism with Ruth Wilson Gilmore from 2020 features Ruthie's internationalist work. She has co-founded many grassroots organizations, including California Prison Moratorium Project, Critical Resistance, and Central California Environmental Justice Network. Ruthie is co-recipient with Angela Davis and Mike Davis of the 2020 London Culture Freedom Prize. Ruthie lives in Lisbon, which is where she is joining us from. A note, Olivier and Ruthie will engage in the conversation, and towards the end of the conversation, the floor will open to questions from the public, from both the virtual chat and the La Colonie Nomad participants who are sharing the same space, albeit, I need to stress that, at a social distance with Olivier. For the international audience, please put your questions into the Q&A Zoom function. And now, Olivier, I offer you the floor. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for that invitation. I'm really happy to be able to take part of that dialogue, I think, from La Dynamo, meaning for a lot of my peers here. So it will be also a conversation with Ruthie, but also with the people here and I think people online. But I will, in a way, prefer that Ruthie can react from the film, from Kader's film, because I'm already speaking in that film. So I will already use a part of my time to speak in the film. I think it will be nice also to engage with Ruthie's remarks about taking as a point of departure the film itself and moving towards some other question we would like to address, including the abolition question. I think it's okay for you, Ruthie. It's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody who has made this afternoon possible. I wish I were there socially distanced with you today instead of at my dining room table, which is where I always am. I saw Kader's film maybe 2 years ago. It might have been quite new then. I can't recall if I saw it here or in Barcelona. And I thought about it a lot. It's so profound in the ways that the images and the people, including Olivier, discuss the conditions under which those images came into being in very precise and consciousness-opening ways. And I have to confess, though, that I have a really deeply ambivalent relationship to still and moving images that show murderousness. They're so prolific. They have accumulated for more than a century. They do not speak for themselves. And of course, this film shows very clearly in so many ways that they do not speak for themselves. And I have spent some time reflecting on my ambivalent relation. And for example, for those who know, 30 years ago, almost exactly to the minute, in Los Angeles, California, some police beat a man called Rodney King viciously. And the film of that somebody who woke up in the middle of the night happened to make with a very old-fashioned portable video machine, spanned the world before social media. And the outcome of that particular brutal and eventually murderous drama, he died of his injuries, but not immediately, was to have the illusion of justice without any actual justice made. So this isn't surprising. And yet, on the other hand, I've worked with many people who have used security footage like the footage in the film we just watched together to show how the official story of what the police did, what the forces of organized violence did in applying deadly violence to a Black person or to a person not white or to a white person in their custody, all of the above, could be narrated differently. With the same images, we can make two stories. Again, these are points that were made in the discussion within the film that we just watched. So I'm kind of stuck, and I'm very excited about today's discussion because we go all the way back to the end of the 19th century in the United States. And one of the first motion pictures ever made was made out of still photos of a very long, very elaborate, very well documented and written about lynching, torture lynching, that even had sound put to it before sound film was an ordinary thing. So I have to ask again, what do we think we're seeing when we see these images? And that, of course, is the challenge that the film has put to us. And I would like, if we can, Olivier, to spend some time thinking about double consciousness in the variety of modes that it arose in the film, as the film, and also in the discussion that you and your comrades provided us with during the film. So double consciousness shapes hypervisibility and invisibility, but it also shapes something that Du Bois and others talked about, again, a century ago, and that is the sense of having at once a consciousness of self as a historical being and a consciousness of oneself as historically becoming, and then the intense and fraught difficulty that emerges when those two consciousnesses, as it were, collide. So we're at this moment of collision again. So why don't I pause, and Olivier, perhaps you would like to join the discussion. I have lots more to say, but I didn't come to give a solo lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. In fact, there is here a really conversation we had with Kader and other people about the exposition of those kind of images, and I'm personally really close to what Saadia Hartman says about how a certain kind of overexposition of image of violence blind a large part of another category of violence. And this, in fact, is the same thing. And so my question that is also to try to keep on the reflection about what the film is proposing is that it's one hand personal and in the other hand from a visual, critical visual perspective, would be how to come back to a scene of crime. If we considered, and I considered, that there is a form of spectacle of the police violence. While I'm talking about a spectacle of police violence, it's just to try to express that there is really a gesture against, for instance, a Black body and the Black men bodies, but not only. this is also a kind of spectacle in the sense of cultural, a culture of terror. So it's really the attempt of that, and the goal of that is really to produce a kind of fear in the body of people that are considered that they could be concerned, that they could be that body. So it means, and we talked about that before, that in a certain way, the spectacle of the police violence, it's made to produce a kind of pacification of the society.
I think that's exactly right. And in fact, in some cases, I'll return to the example of torture and murder within prisons in the United States and elsewhere. Those spectacles are hidden, and yet they have the same spectacular function. Somebody is sent to prison, they come out in a coffin. There's a spectacle that people imagine that, as Norman Adjani says in the film, is a horror. It's something in excess of terror. It's a horror. As well, I was very moved by the discussion about humiliation that's in the film. I found that an extremely, I found the whole film profound, but I found that discussion particularly profound. The issue surrounding the insistence that the ritual of police violence, which is a ritual of human sacrifice, demands humiliation. So it produces humiliation, but it also demands it in such a way that there is nothing the person who is the object of police violence can do to comply to stop the violence. Because the single, as I understand it, the single category of eligibility is to be unwilling. That is all it takes. So whether it is Theo being unwilling and resisting, or the young man who was killed in Colorado last year, who is quite challenged emotionally and mentally, who apologized the whole time that they killed him. He apologized. Or the little boy in Chicago who was standing with his hands up, and the policeman had a camera on his uniform. So the entire assassination of the child was filmed. So the child was, fit the eligibility, which is to say he was unwilling to die. And that's what made him an appropriate sacrificial victim. So
I would like to say just a short thing about that. I do think that, so if we consider that a scene of crime and Polish crime is a spectacle, we have first, I think, to link to a kind of genealogy and history of the spectacle of violence in the Americas, in the Caribbean, let's say in the slavery time. It's really important to people to understand that, for me, that police violence is related to the public execution of people. So it's really important because, for instance, in the framework of the Code Noir in the French Caribbean context, for instance, there is that kind of attempt to limit the domestic violence, but to create a public violence. So the state, from that moment, says you can kill yourself, the raw material of the slavery, meaning the people. But if they do something really bad, we can do a public violence. That got another function, a function of that spectacle of horror, meaning that it's a way to maintain most of the slave and the free people of color under a certain permanent terror. So meaning that the spectacle is there from a really long time. And I remember a really profound introduction of the last book by Elsa Dorlin, Se Défendre. And she was describing a kind of torture machine, that a slave was really in a sort of machine that if he tried to move, he was suffering more. So you suffer more if you try to defend or do a gesture of defense. So it's that scene of violence is a counter self-defensive gesture. So it means if you want to defend yourself, you will suffer more. And it's really important for me because it's really a state tool, so that state violence is based on the anticipation of the possibility of self-defense. And it's used to push more and more people to declare themselves innocent. And we talk about that. We are innocent, meaning that we are moving from the risk of that sin, and we are leaving some people on that sin because they are criminals. So accepting that there is a legitimacy to produce that kind of violence on people because they are criminal, and trying to save your life, which is a natural movement. You can understand why people want to save their life. And so I think, imagine another way of saving your life, not letting people on that scene of crime, is really a question that Kader addressed me as a man of color coming from the outskirts like him. How can we come back to what I call the scene of crime to create another kind of way of saving our life than moving from that scene?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, what you've just raised very eloquently is the entire basis for and purpose of abolition in the contemporary world. So one way that maybe we can approach a little discussion of it is to talk about abolition as life in rehearsal. So abolition is life in rehearsal. And so the question that we put to ourselves as individuals, but mainly as people in various kinds of organizations doing various kinds of things, including making art, including doing mutual aid, including organizing labor unions, including doing land occupations in South Africa or land occupations in Brazil to grow food, whatever it is, that abolition is life in rehearsal. And so it is rejecting the notion that within the system of human sacrifice and death, there is any possibility that that system within itself can adjust such that the innocent will be protected and only the guilty will be punished. This is the fundamental purpose of trying to think abolition. And I'll say one other thing about it for people who might be wondering as they listen to our discussion this afternoon. Many years ago, Kwame Ture, when he might still have been using the name Stokely Carmichael, said, look, folks, Karl Marx didn't invent communism. He observed what people were doing in realizing through a rehearsal of life, this is my words laid onto Carmichael's words, realizing through a rehearsal of life how to bust through the contradictions of a then growing system of colonial racial capitalism. And Carmichael said, so what we are doing now in the 20th century is observing. We're not inventing all of these relations, much less do we exist as some little small vanguard that will inform everybody how to do what is to be done. Rather, we who are working very hard to open consciousness to and through abolition, keep seeing or observing people engaged in life in rehearsal in the contemporary world and back through time. For example, our friend, the filmmaker Sana Hada from Guinea-Bissau, and the work that he has done, and the work that many other people have done around the world. And one of the sort of key thoughts that compels me to continue in the work that I do when I get really tired and discouraged, is to remember something I learned from C.L.R. James and many others, Angela Davis, Claudia Jones, Françoise Vergès, and others, and that is that people make revolutions because they are conservative. That revolutions happen because people try everything and try and try and try. And then as C.L.R. James put it in a lecture he gave in Port of Spain once, eventually people come out in the street and clear up in a number of years the disorder of centuries. But that means that then it has to start again and start again. So I think that the challenge that Kader has put to all of us and that you have put to all of us about how to do something else is already happening in the experiments that people engage in the unfinished revolutions of the 20th century, in some of the new things that are happening in the 21st century that don't mean to turn away and pretend that police violence isn't the problem that it is, but rather to turn away from the idea, I'm going to repeat myself, that somehow there is a protective shield of innocence that we can retreat behind in order to survive in a system that welds difference into itself,
Yes, and so perhaps Lucy, thank you for that. But I think to try to keep on, perhaps to come closer to the notion of reparation, or fragment of repair, as Kader invite us all here and around to reflect about. I would be really interested in hearing you about also the relationship in between abolitionism and reparation, because I think there is a lot of level on that. I would say that the first level I personally reflect was also a reflection about what kind of body we can present because I'm coming from the art and the culture, and so I'm trying to reflect also about police violence as a spectacle in a really serious way, asking myself, first, I don't want to be an unpaid worker in a spectacle. So I'm considered when police coming to me, I don't want to play in your play. You didn't engage me to play a spectacle. It happened to me, just a small anecdote. I was coming back from Rotterdam, from the film festival. I was in Rotterdam, a producer showing films with success, and taking way back to Paris by train. I've been arrested just at the arrival of the train. And the response I gave to the cops, because they were opening everything on my bags, I'm not a part of the spectacle that you are really staging for the other passengers, to show them that they are in a kind of safe place, which is not true. And I'm not a part of your spectacle. I don't want to play that role. My body is not there to play that. So the question is what kind of body we can imagine also to flee from, to try to move from that spectacle. This is really that we haven't been engaged with. So playing also with the notion of the cultural industry, saying, I don't have any contract, any agreement to play on that play. You are playing with my body. So I don't want to play. If you want to control me, ask me why you control just me and why it's so long, why you open everything, my bags. What is the, I don't know, who is really the director of the play? Are you a cop or are you a director? What I'm playing what? The dangerous body. And so the question of how to act in relationship with that spectacle in a really practical way was my first reflection before a wider reflection, because we know that Black men are killed because they sometimes don't know how to get out from that spectacle. And so we saw in context of the US, where I saw a lot of people try to educate young Black men, saying, if a policeman is coming, don't move your hands on. But even if you try to do nothing, even almost nothing is already too much. So it's also a question of collectively considering as a spectacle and having, let's say, kind of critics of that spectacle saying, okay, now what we can do when cops are coming is that. This is the new script. And let's propose to people to script that. Because it's a kind of performance that they are playing with you to save your life. So just to say to people, I don't want to be killed. This is the first thing. One thing, I don't want to be killed in your space. I don't know what is the script, but in that script, I don't want to die. It's just my first demand. Just to say that there is really practical things to reflect about, and of course, a horizon, an attempt that I think abolitionism proposed a direction for that.
Well, to go back to the question of how to help people, including ourselves, not participate in a script we did not consent to, is, of course, a huge, huge question. So to go back 30 years, when in the wake of Rodney King's beating, everybody and their mother and cousin produced a little handbook on know your rights, made a little card that everybody could follow and carry in their pocket. Keep your mouth shut, keep your head up, do this, do that. It didn't save people's lives.
Yeah.
So enough, but it probably did save some lives, to tell you the truth. So then what did that mean? That meant that the work of saving lives becomes something that is not a technical exercise. I'm kind of repeating myself. There isn't anything within the system that will produce justice and protect those who deserve to be protected, because the system of human sacrifice has nothing to do with other than you in the train from Rotterdam, or the child in the alley in Chicago, or the Native American man walking home on a road outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that they are all, everybody, equally unwilling participants in a script of human sacrifice. 1 in 5 murders in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the United States is police killing Native Americans. 1 in 5. 1 in 5. So we have, therefore, an understanding, as you were saying, of the long history of colonial violence, the long history of enslavement, the long history of global domination and extraction. And that brings us to the point of reparation, and that is that something we learned in the 20th century, not to great surprise, is that decolonization in and of itself did not produce anything like what we call today reparation, right? Decolonization was kind of more technical, and we can talk about Fanon if we had time, which we don't, and others who show the transition from one form of extractivism to another without the liberation of the people. And yet, there are unfinished revolutions, and I will go back to the example of Guinea-Bissau, to say that in some places there was an extensive and intensive effort to help people develop the historical personality necessary to achieve reparation, which will never be a gift. So today, as I talk with my Indigenous comrades around the world, wherever they might be, two of the conversations we get very deeply into are, one, that decolonization does not necessitate abolition, but abolition requires decolonization. It really does. And related to that is that as we think about the fact that what we are, our bodies are kinds of places in the world, that we are, each of us, time space. So we don't only exist in time space, we are time space. And I'm 71, so I'm really, 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 really aware of the time part of time space. And the way that these rituals of police violence and rituals of violence that are not necessarily state, but they are sanctioned, express one of the central contradictions that, again, my Indigenous friends and I talk about a lot, and that is that there is a permanent contradiction that we are constantly trying to work through between self-determination, that right of historical becoming, that sense of historical personality, and open borders. Right? So we fight about Fortress Europe, we fight about the wall at the south of the US, we fight about all of the entire chain of camps where long-distance migrants are held against their will and tortured and disappeared as well. People coming from Cameroon by way of Ecuador in order to get to Minneapolis, Minnesota, for example, or to Canada, that we have these central contradictions that we're constantly trying to work out. And for those who might feel that me invoking contradictions is stepping aside from the central question, I'm telling you it is the central question. That contradictions are, in many cases, but not always, antagonistic. And the antagonisms that we experience today are antagonisms that are built into racial capitalism, which is all of capitalism. And that is that capitalism requires inequality and racism enshrines it. That doesn't make racism epiphenomenal, it means it's central to the system. So reparation has got to be, as it is in the imagination of some people, has got to be something that explodes capitalism. It can't be a gift of capitalism.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice that you talk about the contradiction, because I think with the people that of the gathering here in La Dynamo, we spend a part of the day trying to keep that tension in between some notion, because we are really built by those contradictions. In our side this afternoon, it was more the kind of contradiction in between community building and love and legitimacy in violence. So the notion of violence, how we deal with that necessity of a certain kind of, let's say, anthropic force to change the system, meaning that we have to put something really concrete against the system and until where it's going, and how we can come back in create a relationship which seems to be a kind of contradiction of paradox, would be the relationship in between violence and reparation. Considering that we have to redefine things inside the notion of violence that can be useful for our struggles. It's I think, the state of our conversation of today.
Yeah, I think so. And let me go back a little bit to move ahead from the point that you just made. When I talked a few minutes ago about how 30 years ago so many people made a little guide, how not to get killed by the police, nobody thought that doing that kind of thing was enough. The point was that was one of the infinite number of every little thing that people do in the sort of accumulated process of becoming into revolution, right? So I as you know, as the audience knows, I just finished putting together a very long process of putting together a collection of Stuart Hall's writing on race and difference. It's an idea I had in the late 1980s, and it finally is coming out next week. So some things are very slow to develop. And in one of the many wonderful pieces that are in the book that I highly recommend to people is a piece you might be familiar with called Cultural Identity and Diaspora. And in that piece, Hall, drawing, as he often did in his work, very directly and creatively on Gramsci's thinking, talks about how we are, as it were, the accumulation of, the infinite traces that history has deposited in us. And here's my favorite part: without leaving an inventory. So there's the infinite traces that we all are in our becoming, and there is no inventory of them. And what I realize I have tried to do in my life, and why I'm participating in this kind of discussion and do the kind of community organizing I do, is to take seriously that these infinite traces have within them the potential for making the rehearsal of life that abolition is. And if there's no inventory, it means there's probably no outer limit to what is possible that brings people to a certain kind of consciousness. And for me, I did my early adult years, I was in the art world, I wasn't a geographer, I was in drama. And for many, 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 many years. And the way I learned from people, all different kinds of people, to do the sort of work we did was to understand that what we might make possible would be a process through which people participating in a drama, whether they were producers or spectators, would have a sense from the structure and the style of the presentation that this was in society which could change. So it wasn't a picture of society, but the entire encounter is in society, even if it's also a film that runs 20 minutes or a play that runs 2 hours or an installation in a gallery, right? That those two, that dynamic is there. And of course, La Colonie and your space that I had the joy to visit some years ago, that you had for so long, exactly was making that without any guarantee.
I like the idea that you are talking in one hand about the notion of perhaps fragment, we can also call about that fragment of a global movement, that is also a title of the Fragment of Repair that we talk also this afternoon with people here. And the other thing I think is really interesting for me, that is coming back to, let's say, the scene in a sense of, let's say, the cultural and artistic scene, but also in the sense of Jacques Rancière used the notion of scene, in a sense of the possibility of rehearse a situation. And we talk with also with Françoise and Oder about our consider a relationship with culture and art as a space among others where we can rehearse some situation, meaning that things are not there and we really feel they are not, but they could be there, and we have to try to create the test of them through assembling some fragment that we have and inventing other fragments. So creating, I will say, the conditions of the apparition of another kind of reality. That's why, just to come back to the Kader's films, it was a part of our conversation because he made his own decision about doing the film that way. But we talk at least about that aspect, as I'm also a film producer, that I was considering that the Kader's film was composed by several films. And among those films, some films were based on the speech. So the film production has the capacity of producing some imagination from a situation, so not staying stick to the violence of the spectacle. And so we saw it also with Floyd death and others, that there is that kind of really toxic visibility, and that we have to replace it by a kind of speculative way of speaking that is producing what I'm calling the minority cinema. Because considering that in my work, I always considered that the cinema exists still, human exists, but there is a kind of modernity in the cinema that uses certain kind of tools. But hallucination in the Amazon, of Amazon people, storytelling in the Caribbean context, and so on, dance floor and so on, are the cinema of our people. They're producing some potential images that or invocation of some situation, making ourselves growing a situation and create a kind of apparition. So that was to say that I really enjoyed the notion of rehearsing, and what we are trying to do here and there at the moment is that creating some condition of something is not totally already there, but creating what Bonaventure and Dicom from Savvy call an evocation.
This is so exciting to me. And now I'm even more frustrated that I'm not there in Paris to be rehearsing with you, although I realize we're doing it through our screens and there are all different modalities of rehearsal available to us. And we are particularly fortunate because we have these ways of being electronically connected to do what we're doing. And I'm really excited too to think about rehearsal, which I have been just fixated on for a very long time, and thinking about it in relation to fragments, because that's exactly what rehearsal is. I was never a good actor, but I liked acting. But I loved it. It just wasn't, people didn't love what I did as much as I loved doing it. But the intense observation and pleasure that comes from developing a role, whatever it is, whether it's a written role like Antigone or an improvised role, some agitprop on the corner of the street, is to, observe and look and notice and notice and notice, and then take a fragment and present it as part of this society that can change, that the spectator might or might not recognize, as it were, in the jest, to use, Brecht's word, in the jest. And that noticing has so much to do, in my view, with how we manage to piece together the fragments for at least a provisional repair, which comes back to this question of historical becoming, right? And the entire conceptualization that so many people, again, the people who shaped my consciousness in the middle and late 20th century thought through, and that is the whole question of historical personality, that rather than imagine that what history is a recitation of facts, it's rather the becoming, to return to that word that has come up quite a few times in our conversation, that history and the historical personality has everything to do with becoming, and becoming in the context of piecing together the fragments and making them into something different from what they might have been, toward the goal of opening consciousness. And I just want to say as an aside that my dear friend and mentor, Cedric Robinson, somebody I loved very much and miss all the time, turned to me one day, the last time we were ever giving a presentation together, and I said something about experience and blah, 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 and experience and blah, blah, blah. And I was serious and I wasn't being sloppy. And he turned to me and he gave me a look that was like he had hit me, not brutally, but just got my undivided attention. And he said, Ruthie, I've been trying to tell you as long as I've known you, it's not experience, it's consciousness. It's consciousness. And this goes back to something that Olivier, you and I talked about the other day when we were preparing for our conversation. And that is that for, a lot of people, for good reason, the anxiety that comes from experience of, for example, police brutality and Fortress Europe or Fortress United States and so forth, or neoliberal South Africa, or what's happening in India today, and I mean today, this day, that anxiety can and understandably does produce for many people a sense that the way to escape from or avoid or be sheltered from these, constant barrages of violence that lead to premature death is to be innocent, to keep your nose clean, to follow a script that looks to be the official script for belonging in that place, whether that place is France or Portugal or the United States or Durban. And yet we keep seeing it doesn't work. And therefore, but reciting to people, standing up in front of a crowded room of, let us say, young Black men in the United States and saying, they're going to kill you. There is no point in doing that. One, they already know. And two, all that's happened is that, and I experienced this, is that that young people's worst view of what learning is came true, which is learning is being yelled at in a hopeless way by somebody who is bleak, right? This is not a way to make, to put life into rehearsal.
Thank you. Perhaps we can take some question of people here or elsewhere. I don't know how it works, but I think it could be nice to open a bit to how it's not audience, but how our peer that are with us to reflect about those questions.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. I'm Alix Hugonnier, and so I will just be translating the questions from the audience here and the questions that I'm being sent on WhatsApp by Vitske that are being sent on the chat. I'll maybe start with a question from Vitske, and we have another anonymous question, so I'll just read them. So Witke's last question is, what role does empathy play, and particularly empathy as class issue that you have raised elsewhere, Olivier, in the reparation of those necropolitical images of male Black bodies?
Yeah, Vishka referred to a conversation I had with Kader Attia on the program of the AKV, and I was talking about also the notion of empathy that is used also to be with, and I prefer to talk about solidarity, meaning that the capacity of to be with a body is not a mirror of you. And so it's really the problem, I think, with the empathy that have been created in such a kind of moral society is, in a way, you consider the author as somebody reflecting who you are. You got a kind of empathy, meaning that how you deal with people who are not like you or produce as criminal, considered as criminal. So for me, the notion of solidarity is something else that we talk with also the group here, is how we can be, and how in a really open sense, how we can be in relation with people considered as criminal, and how to create a certain kind of relationship with that, and sharing two things, sharing in one hand the responsibility of the situation they are as a global society, meaning that reparation in a global sense, and sharing also something else that is for me more important, not more important, but important too, is sharing the risk of death meaning that the police violence create a zone of risk of death, as prison is creating. And I don't think solidarity is accepting to create, to share that risk of death. And empathy could be something that you stay out from that risk of death, just saying, okay, I got an affective relation with you, which is not engaged in any responsibility. And for me, empathy is really related to the notion of mirroring a situation. And I'm always trying to consider that we have to be in relation with people that don't resemble to us. It's not an obligation that we are the same people, but we have to share something. And I would like just to quote one thing that happened in a situation I share in Marseille, in the FRAC-PACA, which is a contemporary art center of Marseille. Last September, it was a presentation of a collective on undocumented artists called Bureau de Déposition. And that collective create a performance of justice, meaning that we know that the justice in unjust is not fair for us. So we have to create a performance of justice, which is also to defend our capacity of being there. And so they are doing a performance. And in the performance, I've been there with the British scholar Sheila Sheck. We were together there and wrote about that really strong experience I would like to share with you. At the moment of the performance, the collective of Bureau de Déposition, which is constituted by a French scholar and a French artist and 10 male coming from Guinea, they were asking us to take our responsibility. So not staying in the situation of being an audience. They say it's not possible to be an audience of what we are presenting to you, because it's a new form of the performance of justice where you have to accept to take a part of responsibility of something by being there. I find it super powerful. It's one of the most interesting artwork I've seen in my life, I have to say, and I'm professional in a long time, because it was engaging as something in and out of the scene where we were in that scene, but it's engaging something out and from the here, so meaning using all the vocabulary of the art world, but opening to, and I'm really close to what Ruthie talked about, notion of life. And I talk in that text about coming, before we talk about that, I wrote in that text an attempt to go towards the living. So for me, considering that the kind of justice that they're obliged to accept as people try to enter the European fortress is totally against the living, not against some people, against the living in general. And they try to recreate condition of living, including us as an audience. And afterwards, says, okay, let's produce a scene of justice, which is a scene of the living. And for me, it was super strong. So I would like to say, this is, in that point, is not a question of empathy at all. It's really a question of collective production and solidarity.
Exactly.
Would there be a question in the audience here? Yes.
Just a question to Olivier. I was very interested by
Dis-la moi, je vais la répéter. Oh, bien.
Oui, je vais.
Ouais. Faut que les gens l'entendent.
Tu peux prendre le micro, peut-être?
Oui, voilà. Non, faut pas? Ok. Bah, dis-moi la question, je la répète. Sorry.
The notion of not playing into the show you're giving to people. I was very interested by this notion, but what kind of choice do you have as a racialized public when you're detained by cops? And I mean, is it possible really to say concretely to as a racialized public and not playing into the show you're giving to other people? Do you have any choice there?
I would like to say, and yeah.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear it.
Yeah. The question is that somebody asked about, the notion of the script scene of political violence and saying, is it possible really to say, I don't want to play in that on that scene, in that script? Is it possible for real? I will say to answer and try to emphasize what Ruthie said just before. For me, it's a fragment. It's a fragment of a possibility. If you answer to police, I don't want to play in your script, in your show. It creates a new epistemology of that. It's not justice, it's not protecting anything. You are playing a show.
Just a non-compliant body. You're a non-compliant, racialized body, which makes it, possible for them to be even more violent towards you.
Yeah, but I think the question, and so we talk this, just the question of violence. We talked this afternoon about, of course, the notion of violence back, and so the feedback of violence and the self-defense. But I will include in the self-defense the possibility of destroying the situation as a spectacle. I don't want to be a part of a spectacle. It has been really efficient in the case of Rotterdam, when I told them, I don't want, he said, you are a film producer, and said they were smiling. He says, I don't want to smile because I'm a film producer and I'm not paid to be part of your film. And it has been quite efficient. But I can say that in my position. Other people will use other things. But we have to create also another imagination of the self-defense. And I do think that we don't have to be in the position to only accepting situation and try to protect ourselves. The protection is also an issue of imagination. And I will say something else to respond to you about the question of violence, as we try to emphasize just before. The spectacle of the police violence is not only concerning the concerned body, it's a spectacle for the society. So it's also an address to people around. You don't need that spectacle using my body. It's happened also to me in a train with undocumented workers, and so 5 cops around him controlling. It's just after 45 minutes of talking with him, I just says, "I'm sorry, but we don't." And talking for all the people in the coach, we don't need that spectacle. It doesn't give us any feelings of being safe because it's enough. And that argument, people around agree with that, even if they don't know if the guy got a problem. We don't need that. You took too much time to do that, to produce a spectacle for the rest of the people on the coach. And we don't want a spectacle. We don't ask for that. And so it has been really efficient, I have to say, technically. But it's a fragment. And so let's consider that we have to add a lot of other things to that to be efficient.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to add something, if I may. And that is, just to repeat what is in Kader's film and in the conversation we've had this afternoon and in general. There is no way to comply that will save one's life. I hate to say it, but it's true. I am not, therefore, casually proposing that people rush headlong into being objects of human sacrifice. That is not so. But the question is, to now pick up from what Olivier was saying, that picked up from what I was saying, is that what are the fragments of possibility that we can rehearse, that different people can rehearse in a moment that could shift the spectacle and therefore shift understanding and open consciousness. And also I have to say this, it pisses me off that I have to, but I will say it. I've had people in my life die, so I'm not like some, sitting in an ivory tower academic saying, oh, do this and don't do that. That is not the point. The point is this has been very bloody. And the point is also, I will add, that there's a rather profound misconception that accumulates generation after generation, in which the current sort of young adult generation, as they're struggling through the, sort of shape or arc of their structure of feeling, imagine that the earlier generation did not do X, Y, and Z. They couldn't have, because if they had, the current generation would not have the struggles that they have. And certainly in the movement against racial capitalism, that happens a lot. It happened when I was young, it happens with young people today. And the fact is that people have fought the whole time. There really have been revolutions. It's not like there wasn't a revolution in Algeria, there was. It's not like there haven't been revolutions in the Americas and throughout the African continent and in South Asia and so forth. Of course there have been. So the violence is there. And the question is, what are the ways that we can grasp and grasp onto some of the traces that have no inventory in order to rehearse ourselves collectively into the next phase of struggle? Rather, it's not going to be over, it's the next phase of struggle.
Thank you. I'll give another question from someone that is actually anonymous. Greetings, thank you for the conversation. Can you say something about the abolition of art? Since art as we know it is a product of European modernity that has a long history of situated criticality to reveal and call out power structures. To put differently, or second question, how does abolition understand the subject body if we have to assume that the subject body, despite all possible rehearsals of life, refusal of participation, and critically remains entangled without wanting with impulsive violence? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a large question.
Yes.
So just to, I think, to come back to what something Ruthie said about how the process of decolonization, meaning in a national state, didn't produce any abolition, but the abolition will need a process of decolonization. I will say quite the same in the context of the art or the culture. We need a real decolonization of the infrastructure or the history of that to be able to produce abolition. So I think I will come back to the same point. I do defend, and people know it, that it's not possible to transform the art institutions without a real deep decolonization, meaning for me, a re-articulation of the relationship in between art and life. Let's say in general, meaning social movement, meaning a lot of different practices. And so the problem that we are facing is really simple, is really the idea of are we able to create enough desire for a profound and a radical transformation, or only want to try to render a bit better, a bit more fair justice, a fair art, a bit more, or we know that deeply, and I call it in the bones of the institutions, we want to change until really the deeply in the infrastructure, the organization of the value, of all the relationship. But I do think that there is something also relates, if we talk about art, I will more create a kind of connection in between the impossibility of the living, cause of the poverty. So I will come back in the art on the notion of the poverty, including the author rights.
Mm-hmm. And I would just like to add to that, that abolition is presence, not absence. So to abolish art means to rehearse it anew. And it might be the name of the category changes, but we're human. We're going to make things. We're going to make things and then do something else to the thing that we made. And that might be art. I don't know. It's not that everything has to have a practical application, but the fullness of life demands that abolitionist presence. So my book called Change Everything wasn't my idea. My editor gave it the title.
You do so really, it will be okay.
It's like change everything. It doesn't mean erase everything. It just change it. Change it, change it, change it. So the fragments are what matter.
We're gonna try to have this question. So I will start slowly and I'll just repeat what you have to say. Thank you.
So I have more of a commentary than a question, maybe
So I have more a question that a commentary, or a commentary that can lead to a question.
I think there is a couple of time, regarding rehearsal of life and play, because
I think he didn't talk about time that much regarding a rehearsal of life.
there's so little time to rehearse when catapulted into the play.
Because there's so little time to rehearse when catapulted into the play.
So how to maneuver through the rehearsal of life within this context of play.
So how can we maneuver through life within this context of play?
With that in mind, I think of my own situation right now. Being in this context where we take time to be in conversation with one another.
So within that situation and knowing my own context, I think of the time we're taking to,
And we take time to be in conversation with one another.
yeah, we take time to, have a conversation with one another.
So I feel like we are part of the time capsule in a way, and we have this privilege.
I feel we're part of a time capsule and that we have this privilege.
But with that in mind, I think of me extirping living, for instance, today, living my own family that is mourning the loss of a loved one.
And today I'm thinking of going away from my family that is today mourning the life of a loved one, the loss of a loved one.
And so I'm even thinking, does my presence here prevent me from starting a healing journey?
So I'm wondering if my presence here is preventing me of starting a healing journey.
Because I'm thinking there is sort of a multi-layer rehearsal happening at the same time.
Because I feel there's a multi-layer rehearsal happening at the same time.
And I'm wondering this rehearsal that's happening from left and right in our lives.
And I'm wondering if that rehearsal that is happening from left and right
Is labor within this capitalist time, in this racial capitalist
is labor within those capitalist time and racialized capitalist time. Thank you, and it was Anache.
Thank you, Anna. I do think that, as Ruthie said before, we don't have any clear solution of that, and we're going to have to co-produce the answer of your question in a way of your comment. But I will say something that is really, I think when you are thinking in the perspective, or let's say Afro-descendant or post-slavery descendant people, we sometimes we often talk about the trauma that we got from that history, but not very often about the skill we got from that histories. And I'm a kind of person using a lot of the skill I learned from coming from that history, for sure. Is not to be more positive or not, but I do think there is a skill, and there is a skill in masquerade, for instance. So I'm considering that we always are in the process of doing something and doing as if we were doing something. And I do think that the inheritance of the minority is really coming from that, the capacity of doing something and do as if you were doing something. And so there is a double level, of performance, that it can be schizophrenic at some point. So there is a danger in that. But in the other hand, it's a way of acting and protecting you at the same time, being in movement and always considering that there is an as if that is have to be played. And so, and for me, the rehearsal it's a global, let's say, it's a time in itself. It's not a rehearsal towards a goal. The rehearsal is a living time.
Yes.
It's not rehearsing to create something, but is a rehearsing as a way of living. And I always take the same example because my son is doing capoeira for a really long time. and look at the capoeira as if it's a practice of rehearsing a dance. It's also preparation of your body to a struggle, but it became itself a space for family, because I was wondering how to find a kind of sport that my son could do, and we found really a kind of a club for capoeira. And they really have, at the first day, the vocabulary of the family. So your son is coming in the family. It's really, really unusual, because when you want to do football, tennis, basketball, they will never talk about, they will talk, is he a good player? He can play, otherwise he left. They really talk, it was years ago, about a family, and my son found another family in that practice. And I really get really clearly in a personal level how that practice of rehearsal was a way to dissimulate that something was already happening, in fact. So you are preparing something, but in fact, the preparation is a space of living. Exactly. And it's really a space for you, for yourself.
Exactly. And maybe I could add here, picking up those words as if, to remind us that we're all living in multiple temporalities at once. I mean, we're kind of ruled by a certain kind of racial capitalist temporality, and a clock and that sort of thing. But there are also all of the other temporalities that kind of cohere and then fragment and cohere and fragment in our individual and collective relationships in the world. And that these multiple temporalities and as-ifing, which is to say what rehearsal is, gives us some a way of thinking that there is an edge we're always approaching that we will never get to, and that the reason we can keep approaching and not get to it is because, as Olivier said earlier, instead of thinking empathy with a mirror and a flat, hard surface between us, we're thinking social, which is an opening or unfolding or historical becoming. And that means that for solidarity, for example, we don't have to love the people we're in solidarity with. Yeah. Absolutely not. Even though there are all these people we love or will come to love with whom we might be in solidarity. But we can, as if, many things with people we have otherwise no feeling for, other than a kind of, planetary humanism that Sun Ra is trying to sing us into through his rehearsals.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap it up, but I have a very small questions that would be from, sorry, I can't find his name, Joachim Ben Yacoub, that was thanking you for this inspiring and humbling conversation to you both. And no, sorry, that's not it, sorry. Someone else was just asking you for the name, actually, of the theater play you were mentioning, Olivier, before.
Yeah, and so I don't remember exactly the complete name of the play, but you can go to the group calling up Bureau de Déposition.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can look in French, it's a French name, Bureau de Déposition. Déposition means the place you are going to testify of something, because they invert the notion of deposition inside a kind of police epistemology. So saying, okay, we are okay to tell a story, because what is really fascinating in that case is that those people and documents, they have to use something that is really close to what we can do in the art and cultural world. This is storytelling. Their life depending on storytelling. They have to find the right storytelling, but they got a certain kind of audience, which is the police. So what is a good storytelling for the police? So those people can tell their life, they have to tell the life for the police. They have to produce that kind of storytelling. So the way they really dismantle that kind of really police storytelling is to try to create bureau de déposition where they are able to tell their own story in another way. And what is really strong, you can go to the internet writing Bureau des Dépositions, they are based in Grenoble. What is really important in that project is that so they constitute themselves as an artwork, and they use the author rights, which is a European rights, against the right that are used against them. So they use the fact that it's not possible that a state interrupts their right of producing an artwork, which is a European right, and so they use the author right against the right of being in the territory, and so they use some right of the European epistemology against all the right of the European epistemology, saying that we want to recreate the possibility of being there as we are an art worker, but also as we are ourselves as a community, an artwork, which is also a response of what Anna asked about rehearsal. They are in a permanent rehearsal, and they say you can't interrupt our rehearsal because we got author right on what we are doing, and you are defending author right. So it's a really strong proposal, and so we decide to write in French and in English with Sheila Sheikh a text about that to try to help to disseminate that strategy. And they are really working on the notion of jurisprudence, meaning that they want to create a precedent in the justice that can be used by other people. And so our engagement as an audience in solidarity was to write about what we saw, to try to spread it in French and English, and going to be translated in other languages, that to be used by undocumented collective in other countries in Europe as a kind of practice of defending yourself as an author of a permanent rehearsal of your life. So I think it's really inspiring, and we try also to do our job with that thing, which is totally incredible for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you both. It was a super inspiring conversation. Maybe Wietske, you want to take the floor again? No, Maria is then going to have a last word.
Maria gonna say the last word?
Yeah, thank you so very much. Alex, thank you so very much for taking care of conversation at La Colonie Nomade at La Dynamo, and for your excellent time management. Olivier, Ruthie, thank you so very much for such an extraordinary conversation. Really extraordinary. Thank you. Organically, the conversation moved towards the question of chronopolitics, and perhaps it's a great introduction for the next session, which is actually on the 13th of May at 18:30 Central European Summertime, which will be on temporalities of repair. And I'm quite excited to move from this extraordinary conversation and to move, not quite, but to continue this conversation. It will be a gathering with political and ethical theories writer and critic Amadeo Chieng, who gives a lecture titled Utopianism, Anti-Utopianism, and the Radical Politics of Chronotopia and Ungovernability, which will be then followed by a conversation with BAC curator of public practice, Rachel Rakes. I really hope you will join us, but for now, really heartfelt thanks, Ruthie, Olivier, and everybody. This was extraordinary. Thank you.